What's up, Nole Nation? Welcome to another episode of Plant the Spear podcast. Michael, we just got a commit hot off the press, depending on when you're watching this. We got some more targets to talk about as Florida State is looking to build that roster, infuse some talent for 2025. We also got another round of the playoffs to react to, as well as some other bowl games. You know, there's supposed to be that cold front moving into the Southeast, but I've heard South Florida is on cyclone watch because they had a little strike down there in South Florida where they came up a little bit short there. So got a lot of things to talk about today, but it actually has been a little bit quiet. We were sitting here kind of wondering what we would fill the show with, but I think we have enough to get you guys up to speed on what's happening with Florida State right now. So excited to get into it. Before we do that, my friend, I almost said it. I almost said thank you for joining me again. And to give you guys the backstory on this, Michael's been my co-host now for over a year. I always keep saying thank you for joining me when he's a staple on the show. So we're trying to get better about that. So, Michael, how are you, my friend?
I'm great. Happy New Year to you, Jesse, and to your family. Happy New Year to you, Noah Nation, Plant the Spear Nation. So glad to be with you guys today. Yeah, man, it's been really slow. We were talking about that kind of in the pre-show, like just not been a lot of news. There are probably some parameters why there's not been a lot of news that I'm sure we'll talk about today as well too. But it's kind of nice to be able to kick the show off with breaking news of getting a brand new commitment. So love that. So ready to get into it.
Yeah, definitely. We'll talk about that in just 1 minute. But before we do that, let me just jump in and give you guys a quick word from today's sponsor, and that is Alumni Hall FSU. I mean, these guys are killing it, Michael. They just launched an app. They just had a $1,000 giveaway, which they'll be announcing the winner soon. And so these guys got elite gear. New year, new gear, Michael. So it's time to go stock up. Make sure when you head over there to use code SPEAR to get 10% off your order. You can use that online or in store. So make sure you check those guys out. I'll link it below to make it easy for you guys. So also one thing before we jump into this, I think I might be coming down with something talking about the weather. So if I sound like I just smoked a pack of Pall Malls, I do apologize, but I've had a little bit of time to warm my voice up here because me and Michael were talking before the show, and we should have hit record because we had a whole hour-long episode that we might have to re-record for you guys sometime. But let's get into these portal targets and this recent commitment that we just got here. Now, Florida State has had a flurry of portal prospects coming on campus, as they do have this January visit window from the 1st to the 5th to get guys on campus. So they're trying to get as many on campus as they can and try and get some commitments for the ones they like. Now, of course, you'll also have more players that are going to be entering later on with the playoff teams that they kind of have that extended portal window.
Right.
But they've had a lot of guys on campus. And just prior to hitting record, we actually had this down as one of our top targets that was kind of on commit watch here. But he committed before we could push record, and that is Caleb. And I've heard, now I'm going to say what I've heard, right? We've heard Lavali. So Caleb Lavali, linebacker from North Carolina, hails out of Smyrna, Georgia, 6'1", 225. Looks like he'll be a redshirt sophomore or a sophomore coming into Florida State. Does have 3 years of eligibility remaining, which I love. Now, the thing with Lavali here, Michael, is he's only had one career start during his time at UNC. But he has played a pretty decent amount, 127 snaps. So not a lot, but he's appeared in all 13 games this year. He did make his first start in the bowl game against UConn, played 65 snaps. So literally half of his snaps came in one game.
Right.
And I think had it not have been for the bowl game, maybe you're like, okay, this is, nice depth piece, young guy, lots of years remaining, but not much to get excited about. But when you go look at what he did in that bowl game, I think you can immediately see the upside to taking this kid. And I do, a page that we work with, the Heel brothers here from the College Huddle, I did see them actually post about this is going to be one they're going to miss because you could see the upside in that bowl game. Comes in against UConn. Now, they did lose that game, but he actually led North Carolina's defense in tackles in that game, 9 total, 7 solo, 1 tackle for loss, 1 PBU, and an excellent 78.5 PFF grade. So, I mean, this guy, not a lot of experience on the field, but then when you look at what he did in that bowl game against UConn, you can see why they're interested in him. You can see why they like him. Yeah. And, there's some other things that we'll talk about in a second. But, man, when I went to look this kid up, he was a 4-star prospect for Rivals, but only a 3-star for 247. And when you start reading some of these high school accolades, man, my goodness, this is just an athlete, man. And this is why I get excited about this. So he was, as I mentioned, a 4-star prospect by Rivals. We don't typically use Rivals on this show.
Right.
He was only a 3-star per 247, but when you look at the high school attributes, man, 2-time team captain, first team All-State, All-Region, All-Cobb County, the region's defensive player of the year, a member of the Georgia High School Football Daily Top 100. He tallied 425 tackles, 18 sacks, 57 TFLs, 4 interceptions, and 3 forced fumbles in 3 years of high school football. Just his senior year was 172 tackles, 6 sacks, 24 TFLs, and 3 interceptions, 1 return for a touchdown, and a forced fumble. He led the entire state of Georgia in tackles at 15.6 per game in his senior year. So, man, when you look at this kid, I think this is a very high upside, very young guy, great clay to mold. And it might be even worth mentioning that he also is a good baseball player. So, we'll see. Second team All-State and All-Region as a catcher. So maybe that's another little tidbit there that Link Jarrett got involved in the recruitment too. We'll see. We know Florida State's had a lot of guys that can do both that have committed recently. So, man, I like this get. I think this is a good high upside pickup for Florida State.
Absolutely. There are 3 things I like about this. I like that, one, he was a high rated productive player in high school, that he's not just some, squib coming out of high school, had a little bit of stats, got on UNC, didn't really play much, and then kind of showed up in the bowl game. No, this guy was a tackle machine in high school. He's comes into UNC, gets a start in the bowl game, and shows how he's very highly productive. 9 tackles. I mean, he led the team in tackles. The second thing I love about it is that he's got 3 years. He's got 3 years to come to Florida State. He's got to be moldable. You obviously would imagine that Tony White, the new defensive coordinator, probably somebody who's going to see and look at the linebackers, they're going to bring somebody in. He's going to want a productive player, and he probably sees this guy as somebody who can be in that potential 3-3-5 stack defense and be productive. And then number 3, Jesse, and I mean this with all sincerity because you're my friend and my brother, I'm excited that we got another white linebacker.
Right. I know.
Let's be real. Those white linebackers have been killing Florida State for years, and we never have them. And we finally got one. Alabama had one. Georgia's got them. Now Florida State's got them. And let's hope, along with Blake Nicholson, that we can continue to develop them and to be really good as what they should be. Now, we're just missing that one linebacker with the neck roll. And then
like Georgia Tech had.
Yeah.
But hey, man, if we roll out the Crackerbackers next year, we'll be all over it with Blake Nicholson and Caleb. I think you bring up some good points, right? You got 3 years here, and I did hear where he had talked about they've referenced to using him as a middle to will linebacker in this 3-3-5 defense. So I do think when you look at what you got at the position, again, you talk about, you got Blake Nicholson there. Omar Graham Jr. took his name out of the portal. And you got the Stephon Thompson guy that came in that transferred. That's a big time veteran guy there. I don't know how much he's going to see the field this year, but you do like that he does have 2 years of college development under his belt. So it's not like he's coming in and needs to physically develop.
Right.
He's been in the college strength and conditioning program for 2 years now. So I think he can contribute right away if you need him to. But if he needs another year to get kind of seasoned and get that experience, I think you can have him for them that last year or two as a step-in starter. But I definitely think depending on how things shake out, I mean, 1, I think he gives you good depth at the position, but 2, I do think he has the ability to come in and compete for a starting spot, being that he has 2 years of college experience. So yeah, man, I like the pickup here. Again, 6'1", 225, 2 years of college, development so far. And again, the linebacker position, man, this is somewhere that we've always struggled with. So it will be nice to see them add another body to the room. So I like it as well. There are a couple other linebacker targets that we'll talk about later on. So I think they definitely know that they need help at the position. But man, I love this one. And again, as you said, 3 years. It's not a 1-year rental. So that is the actual commitment of today. So we have upgraded him from the watch to the commit list. So now let's move over to the watch list on some other guys that we have here that we feel pretty good that Florida State is leaning to. And to start with, that is Chris Murray, edge defender from Sam Houston State. Really a highly coveted guy out of the portal, hails out of Wichita Falls, Texas. And you look at him, he comes in as a redshirt senior, 6'4", 255. He's played 729 snaps. Last year, very productive. 35 tackles, 11 and a half tackles for loss, 5.5 sacks, 2 forced fumbles. And, PFF, they didn't even have him listed as a starter. I think he only started one game.
Okay.
So I think he was probably like a positional, where he rotated in. He was probably like a sack specialist, a pass rush specialist. But, man, the one thing we always talk about is there's always that concern that guys are not going to translate from G5 to P4. And that is certainly a fair argument. But we also know that Florida State has found some diamonds in the rough from that G5 level. And if you're looking for a diamond in the rough from that level, this guy fits the bill. Now, when you look at Conference USA, and let's be honest, man, after conference realignment, Conference USA is not the greatest conference, right? So I do want to put that little bit of asterisk out there too. But when you look at what he did in that conference, he's one of the top 2 edges in the entire conference. First off, he was first team all Conference USA. And then I did some looking last night when I saw Terrence Knight, and Florida State defensive line coach, put out his Suge Knight tweets, which usually means we're getting something's coming. And so that's why I feel really good about his commitment. And if he does commit, so I did some numbers because we feel good about it. Among defensive ends in the Conference USA, last year, Chris Murray was number 2 in PFF grade, tied for first in pressures, tied for first in sacks, first in quarterback hurries, number 1 in pass rush production per PFF, tied for first in forced fumbles, and 10th in stops. So if you're going to take a guy from the G5, this is about as good as it can get. Now, I know Sam Houston is a small school. Conference USA is one of the worst G5 conferences out there. But again, at the same time, man, like, this guy is the best you can get from the entire conference, not just from Sam Houston State. And so, I think that would help bolster some depth on that defensive line.
Well, yeah, and I think, I know there's fear about, like, okay, well, look what happened with Grady Kelly. He came in, he wasn't very productive. Wasn't anything. Honestly, he got blown up every time he saw him. And so, yeah, look, this is evaluation, and sometimes in evaluations you can miss. But let's remember, they brought in, again, Jared Verse and Braden Fisk, who were very productive at their schools, and other schools were on them, but we had no idea. No one had any idea if they would translate very well to the Power 4 level. And they not only translated well, but they ended up leading a team to a 13-0 season, and then got drafted in the NFL. And one of our boys is a Pro Bowler now, which I know we'll talk about at some point. And so that all came from the evaluations of Florida State. So if they're on somebody early, and this Chris Murray is not just Florida State, there are other schools other schools that are in the Ohio States and the Michigans and all like that want him. And so I would imagine that if this continues to trend well, Florida State's going to find another diamond, not in the proverbial rough.
Right. Yeah, no, I agree. And I mean, even then, Sam Houston State was pretty good in the Conference USA. They won 10 games this year. And you're right. I mean, he has already checked out Mississippi State, Kentucky, Nebraska, and Missouri. So you feel pretty good compared to those other programs. I know Missouri does like to throw around some NIL dollars there, but man, I mean, again, if they feel like they can take him and they can use him and he's a good pickup for them, then by all means, you got to trust their evaluations. Exactly. And again, like we said, if you're going to take a guy from the G5, and it's not always a guarantee, but this is one of the best out of the Conference USA. Yeah. So I think you could definitely get him in here. And, again, you lost both starting defensive ends. Right. Now you've brought in a couple guys so far, but you're going to need to get that depth and that level of competition raised so that you can, going into the season, you can get the best of the best on your roster and have that depth. Now, one of the other guys that I want to talk about here that we feel pretty good about, now nothing's guaranteed. We'll see if he takes these next visits. But speaking of G5 to P4, Michael, this is one, man, I really want this kid. And that is Rashul Faison, running back from Utah State. Look, I originally did not think Florida State was going to be in the market for a running back. You lost to a Philly. You have a ton of talented young guys. I believe they even said, the school has already said that Keziah Holmes does have another year of eligibility, even though he really hasn't done much during his time at FSU. But I think this is one of those players that if he falls in your lap, you just can't pass him up.
Yeah.
And so when you look, he comes in here, 5'11", 200, did go the JUCO route before he got to Utah State, only has 1 year remaining. So I think this is kind of one of those guys. He can come in, he can be your bell cow, and then you can pass the baton to the younger guys going forward after he gets his year. Because again, remember all the running backs that you have in this room outside of Keziah Holmes, and I don't know if Roydell Williams is going to be back or not.
That's right. We haven't heard anything.
They're young, right? And so they could use another season. And then I also don't think you saw enough from Roydell Williams or Keziah Holmes that you don't look at taking a veteran
Correct.
who's a better running back than those guys are. But he is rated as a 4-star transfer by 247, 5'11", 200 pounds. Man, this guy literally looks like you stuffed muscles into shoulder pads. I mean, he is thick. And so when you look at the production, man, this is why I think they really, really like him. 2024, 198 attempts, 1,109 yards, 5.6 yards per attempt, 8 touchdowns. He averaged 92.4 yards per game, and I love it. 22 receptions, 99 yards out of the backfield, so he can catch the ball as well. And just I went and looked at some numbers again for Faison here, and 88.3 PFF run grade, which is great. The one thing that really stood out to me, Michael, 0 fumbles in 315 rushing attempts over the last 2 years. Top 10 in missed tackles forced with 69. Top 10 in breakaway runs, which are design runs over 15 yards. So what that tells me is he's a productive running back who's careful with the ball. He can break tackles, and when he breaks tackles and gets into space, he can break away from you.
Yeah, he can get
I
away
love
from
all those things. That sounds to me like Trey Benson almost, right? Got the strength the strength to break tackles, the speed to break away once he does. And even if you look back to 2023, 118 attempts, 736 yards, actually had a higher per carry average at 6.24, 5 touchdowns, 11 receptions, 52 yards. So, man, I'll kick it to you on this, but looking at what he said after this visit, loved everything about it, exceeded his expectations, said Florida State was amazing. He did spend most of his time with Mike Norvell and running backs coach David Johnson.
Yep.
And he did touch on Gus Malzahn's history with running backs because, we worried about the quarterback recruiting in a Malzahn offense, but the running backs should be, you should get every running back because when you look at the way they use running backs, even in the last 2 seasons, Gus's leading running back had 1,577 yards and 1,416 yards in 2023. So they're going to put up running yards from the running back position. And they typically have one guy that is kind of their baton carrier. So I think this can be that guy for you in Gus's offense. The biggest thing that I worry about is he does have plans to visit Bama, Utah, and UNC, but there's rumors that those may not happen. So if he does take those visits, maybe you're a little bit concerned. But if you can get him to commit before he takes those, man, I think this would be a massive pickup, knowing you're going to be running Gus Malzahn's offense next year.
Well, yeah, and I think Gus Malzahn was I think Gus Malzahn was a big reason why they were able to flip that big Georgia running back in the high school recruiting, which is huge because it's been proven over and over again. Gus and running backs are like, 2 peas in a pod. He has great success out of it. He gets the most out of them. And so, yeah, when this guy comes over and he sees all of that, he sees Gus Malzahn, he gets to hang out with Yak or David Johnson, to those who don't know who he is. And then, of course, the energetic, always on level 10 Mike Norvell. Yeah. He walked away from this visit, from what I've read, just thoroughly excited, thoroughly impressed. And he even said, it's not even just a rumor. He even said, I don't know about those upcoming visits to Alabama. Like he said he needed to talk to his family, which leaves me and probably you and the rest of Nole Nation thinking, Florida State gave him at least enough to ponder whether or not he should continue on. Now, the hope is that within today, hopefully, maybe at the end of this recording, it'd be nice during this recording if they could he could pop there. But at some point, hopefully today or tomorrow, in the next couple of days, that he will commit. Now, I worry. I'll be honest, Jesse. I worry that if he does end up going on that visit, we probably won't get him back. And so I'm just hoping they did enough to just say, you know what, this school we're going to be at.
Yeah, and I think when you come from a school like Utah State, anytime you go see a program like a Florida State or, even a North Carolina or wherever the places he's looking at visiting, you're immediately going to be blown away, right? Because it's just an entirely different game that you're playing. But like you said, man, if he gets to Alabama, then, you do worry because they have so much money and so many great facilities that you do worry about that as well.
Right.
But I think the opportunity to come in here to a running back heavy offense and be the lead guy, I think that definitely has to be enticing for him. And so, man, if you could get him in the fold and that's just, to me, that's going to change a lot. That's really going to make me feel so much better about that offense because, again, you're talking about having a quarterback who's rushed for over 1,000 yards before. Now you have a running back that's going to be back there with him that's also rushed for 1,000 yards, and you just landed basically enough to make over your offensive line. man, this would be huge for them to get. Now, I definitely think they should probably take another couple offensive linemen, but they've kind of seemed to cool on hosting guys from the offensive line. So maybe they're just waiting to see who else pops in the portal, or maybe they feel good about what they got. Maybe they feel like they can get some more out of the guys that are already on the roster. But man, if you get him in here, I think that's going to immediately change how you feel about this offense because it's proven production. And again, it's in an offense where you need a proven producer at running back. Now, some of the other names to mention here is, Michael, I live up near Asheville, and it's there's a lot of cool things in Asheville. And one time we were looking through, we were going driving, and I saw this thing in the woods, and I had to stop and take a picture of it. And it was a white squirrel. First time I'd ever seen it in my life.
Okay.
Now, this ain't a white squirrel, but this is squirrel white. That you were probably thinking, where the heck is he going?
I was like, where is he going with this?
So if we have white squirrels in Asheville, I hope we get squirrel whites in Tallahassee, because he is currently on campus visiting Tallahassee, and this is going to be wide receiver from Tennessee. This is one where obviously I think everybody in the country knows who Squirrel White is because of his name, right? And that's not his actual name, but that's what they call him.
Right.
And so comes in coming off of an injury-ridden season at Tennessee. But still, man, even when you look when he got injured and missed a bunch of time at Tennessee, still had 34 catches for 381 yards and 2 touchdowns. Probably would have been pretty daggone close to being our leading receiver last year, even injured. But then you look back to 2023 and you see the potential there. 67 receptions, 803 yards, and 2 touchdowns, 5'10", 167. So, man, I definitely think that what they're looking at the receiver now, I like a lot of the receivers that we already have. I feel pretty good about some of the young guys. I like that you added Deuce Robinson for size there. I know you brought in a couple of JUCO guys as well. But I do think Squirrel White, if he can stay healthy, can be an immediate impact guy. He can raise the floor of that room because, regardless of what you think about BJ Gibson and some of these other young guys, Elijah Moore and all those, we just still haven't seen it a lot. And, the theme that we've talked about with these transfers since the beginning of the offseason has been high floor, proven producing guys.
Yes.
And so I think this is another one of those where it's a high floor, proven producer who can come in and you don't feel like there's a lot of guesswork. And so we'll see if they can get him. I think the fact that you got him on campus already, I think that's a good sign. But yeah, man, I think this would be huge to get Squirrel White in Tallahassee.
Well, yeah, I really do too. And, for Marquarius Malik White, that's his real name, also known as Squirrel White. Listen, I sum this up to what Winston Wright should have been for Florida State. Yeah. You remember they brought in Winston White. He was this high productive wide receiver out of that came from West Virginia, got in a car accident, took some time, and then I'm not entirely sure what happened. But it just didn't work out at Florida State. And so I think this is an opportunity. If they can get his commitment, if they can get him to come, then he's that like blazing underneath slot receiver, can do all the things that Destin Hill was supposed to be, before he transferred out to LSU to be a part of the family. And so I think that's where you can use Squirrel White. I think it would be a great addition to that room, especially if you got, your big, tall trees, as we've got a ton of really big, tall trees out there out wide. If you got them out there blocking, a lot of that wide receiver screen stuff that they were trying to run last year where they had Ja'Kai Douglas blocking for you. Again, I don't understand that. I know. But I think that could help if you get a Squirrel right in there. So it'd be great if they could get him. Do they need him? No, they don't need him. But it'd be great if they could get him.
Yeah, and agreed. I think this guy gives you a level of speed that, I'm sure you have some speedy wide receivers, but he gives you speed with proven production, kind of like we were talking about before with Malik Benson. You wanted that guy who was a burner that could take the top off of a defense, and it just kind of didn't work out for, a mid of reasons. You didn't have an offensive line that could block long enough to throw the ball deep. Right. And then when you did, DJU overthrew him half the time anyway. So, or he dropped it. So it's kind of one of them where it's like, maybe this can be a better version of that. And so I would love for you to land this guy because, again, this ties back into everything that we've talked about. I mean, you saw where, basically every transfer that you've got so far has produced at some sort of level. And so you're getting a guy, that did put up 800 yards when he was healthy in the SEC. So I like that as well. Now, staying in the same vein of wide receiver, this one's a little bit more contested here, and that's Traylon Ray. Comes West Virginia wide receiver transfer. He's from Tallahassee. So I get why you're entertaining the local kid because this is probably an easy get for you. to be able to get a guy to come basically back home. 6'1", 195, was a sophomore last year, so he would have multiple years of eligibility remaining. The contention is that he's coming off of an injury. And so we don't know how healthy he is, but we just talked about a guy who's coming off injury. So, if you're going to be willing to take one, I'm sure they know. And hey, look, they got criticized heavily for taking Trey Benson coming off of injuries.
That's right.
And that worked out fine. So we'll trust the doctor's opinion, the team, the athletic training staff on that as well. But he does come in after a 2024 season where he put up 28 receptions for 426 yards and 4 touchdowns. Obviously, in a season where it was cut short due to injury. He is scheduled to visit Ole Miss as well. But, again, man, I think really the takeaway from this more than anything is even with the addition of Deuce Robinson, it tells you that they feel like they still need help at wide receiver, especially for an offense that's going to be very run heavy. They don't seem to be able to trust a lot of the guys that they have in the room if they're still looking at bringing in 1 to 2, or more receivers on top of what they've already got. So, I do like both of these guys. I think if it can be a depth piece for you because, again, if you like the young guys that you got, there's nothing saying that they can't still go out and win the job, right? But I don't think you're bringing a guy like Squirrel White to not start. So I like both of these. We'll see how they pan out, whether they're takes or whether they're even pickups, by us. But like I said, I do think the biggest takeaway from this is the fact that they don't feel like they're in a good position right now with the wide receiver room, so they still need some help.
Yeah, and I wonder if it's a situation of who commits first. Like if they can get either Squirrel or Treylon. I don't know if they're taking both because they're very similar in build and like kind of style of football they play. And so I'm not entirely sure why you need 2 of them. Now again, listen, it ain't my money, so they can take as many players they want. But it seems to me like they're trying to bring in the 2 similar players to see who they can get commit. They'd be happy with either one. It seems like maybe. But whether or not who commits first is a thing. And then I also agree with you in the sense of I don't think they trust that wide receiver room before the additions that they brought in via the high school rank and the transfer portal. I don't think they trusted anybody in that room to be somebody of helpful need for 2025. And so they're literally doing what they're supposed to do, which is to recruit over those guys. Now, if those guys want to play, they got to show up. They got to produce. But the coach's job is to recruit over you, to get the best players he possibly can. And so, like you said, I would agree that it feels like they feel like they don't have what they need in order to have a competent wide receiver room next year. So they're going out and trying to get everybody they possibly can to fit what they need.
Yeah, and I think there's really 2 important things to divert off of that, right? And I think the first thing is the young receivers last year were definitely talented.
Yeah.
But you also heard Mike Norvell. Now, granted, you got to take what he said with a grain of salt because everything he said was wrong at some point. But throughout the entire season, he kept the same message about the younger guys when everybody wanted to see him about, well, they have to prove that they're ready in practice to be able to step onto the game field. And then even then, they didn't play a whole lot on a 2-10 team. So that tells you that he did not think that they were ready then. Now, granted, you could argue guys like Deuce Spann and, Portier and all them weren't really giving us a great chance to win either. But the fact that they didn't get on the field, it doesn't mean they don't like the guys. It just means that maybe they're not ready yet, or maybe they'll play more. But again, like we said, with the way they're approaching things with wanting proven production, because again, they know good and well they got to win like 8 games next year. And so they're wanting high floor guys that can go out and help them achieve that. And then the second thing that maybe we should have brought up a little bit sooner, but I think it's also the assumption that we're going to be under the 105 scholarship rule going into next year. And I was commenting back and forth with a friend of mine, George, from the Renegade Report. If you guys don't know, go check him out. And he was saying that he had heard that there's a possibility that maybe they just don't have the spots right now. And maybe that's going to be something where, the next spring portal session opens up, that you're going to have to see some more outgoing to make room for some more ingoing. And that's why they've been kind of slow playing things a little bit here, because that 105 limit is going to change things, because you're coming into that with over 105 players. Now, it might only be 85 scholarship players, but you're going to have to decide what you're going to do with some of these walk-ons and stuff too. So that's something that they're going to have to watch going forward, because again, you have to make it all work. And we were talking about this before the show, that like we got to find out more specifics, right? Like, could you go into spring carrying 120 kids, and then maybe after spring, because they have another portal window for 30 days after your spring usually typically wraps up, maybe that's when, like the NFL, you cut from 70 down to 52 or something like that.
53,
so yeah, maybe you carry 120, 125, then you cut down to 105. But I do think that is at least a small factor of why you haven't just seen them like hungry hippos out here for commitments,
right.
just grabbing up everyone they can get, because you still got to manage that roster size.
That's right. Yeah. Well, and I just think too, like, I mean, the question I asked you when we talked about this in the pre-show is like, is the NCAA actually enforcing these roster sizes? Or like, is somebody coming to every school and counting 1, 2, 3,
Right.
4, like to
Yeah.
figure out if you've got the right roster? Do you have to submit a roster at some point in time? Like, I mean, because if you like, there's just so many unknowns about how this whole roster thing situation is. But if George is correct, and if they're just not taking people right now, they're not taking commitments because maybe they're just trying to figure out the roster thing. I think it's a situation where you just take the commitment and then figure it out by the springtime, because there is another transfer portal window that's coming up at the end of spring where kids who maybe either don't have a roster spot or are encouraged, as College Football 25 says, to ask those kids to transfer. They'll have another opportunity to get into the portal to figure out where they need to play at for next season. So to me, it's like it's a moot argument. Go ahead and take the kids. You'll figure out the roster spots as they come.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think maybe if anything, it makes you be a little more choosy about who you're going to take, right? True. You can't just take everybody. You only want to take the ones you know that can help you, because eventually you're going to have some tough conversations with somebody. Right. And if you're going to kick someone off your roster, you might as well do it for someone who's better than they were.
Right.
You know, the wins above replacement, as we talk about all the time as well. And obviously they just took the UNC linebacker commitment, so they must have some room somewhere. But again, this is the gray area of college football that's ever changing, that we're going to have to get some clarification on once this House settlement finally does drop. It's hard enough to keep up with college football as it is anyway. This is just another thing that really keeps us on our toes here. But looking at some of the other people that have visited recently that are targets for Florida State, and I think the one that probably everybody wants the most, and this may be one of them situations where when you see him take the Caleb kid, that this means that this one may not be panning out for you. But if you could get one, it would probably be linebacker Maurice Watson Trent out of Georgia Southern. He was recently on Florida State's campus. I don't think he's wrapped his visit up yet, or maybe
he's still there.
He's still there at the time of recording this. So that's good that you've had him on campus for an extended amount of time. Now, the thing is, like, this would be a massive get, because when you talk about proven producers, it doesn't get any more proven producer than this guy. I mean, he's a 3-year starter who's had more than 100 tackles in each season at Georgia Southern, who plays in the Fun Belt. And so last year he had 120 tackles and was named Sun Belt Conference Player of the Year for defense. Michael, this guy screams Tatum Bethune all over again, because when Tatum Bethune came here, this was during the G5 era of UCF. They hadn't made the transition yet, but you look at when he came here and it's like, okay, well, he had 100 plus tackles last year at UCF from the G5 level. So, but it's like, you're getting an insanely productive guy from the G5 level, and it ended up working out. He ended up being good for your defense. And so, man, if you can get this guy, I think he's your day one starter at linebacker.
Yeah, I really agree. I mean, this kid from day one, from the moment he went into the transfer portal, everybody wanted him. Everybody jumped on the train for him, and he was, for him to get here to Florida State was a huge thing. I think for Tony White and that defensive staff to be able to convince him to come on a visit. He's still currently on the visit. I hope they don't let him leave. I hope they back the Brinks trucks up, the Bank of America truck up, whatever truck they got with something in it. I don't care.
Yeah.
Back it up. Say, this is all yours. Come play here, because I think he could be, like you said, your day one, but not just your day one starter, but your actual alpha dog on that defense, to get that defense. Now, again, the defense wasn't like atrocious last season. It wasn't good. It wasn't atrocious, but this could be a player that is not just a diamond in the rough, if you want to call it that, from the G5 level. Like, this guy is true production. I don't know if he's going to be some great 5-star NFL top 5 draft pick linebacker, but he could be a solid linebacker like Bethune was, like Kalen DeLoach was, that going to get you in the right play, get you set up right way, and get you in the right leverage so that you can have the best success for each play. And I would love it. I would love it if we could get this guy along with Caleb, because now you got the future and you got the now, and that's what we need.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point, because I was literally just thinking in my head that I think this gives you some versatility in your linebacker room, right?
Yes.
Now, it's time for Blake to start and be your starter. It's time. But I think this also means you don't have to play people who maybe aren't ready, like the Caleb kid.
Correct.
If he is technically your future, there is the conversation with the Stephon Thompson kid. Like, he
Yep.
was really good at Syracuse, didn't really make a big impact at Nebraska. And is there a
That's right.
reason for that? So I think it gives you some flexibility to not have to put guys out there who maybe aren't ready, especially when you're talking about a 3-3-5 defense that's more dependent on linebacker play than you would be in a 4-2-5. So
Right.
I think if you get this guy, he can come in and he can start for you day one. And again, he's a little bit undersized at 5'11". But at the same time, obviously at 5'11", 225, but it has not stopped him from being a producer for Georgia Southern. And anytime you got a guy who has a nose for the football, this is instincts, this is tackling, this is everything you want in a linebacker with 100+ tackles in the last 3 seasons. So again, we'll see if they can close the deal on him. But man, this would be a massive get for Florida State.
Be nice. It'd be real nice.
Yeah. And so the last one to talk about here that is visiting Florida State right now, and that is defensive lineman Diamante Diggs from Coastal Carolina, arrived to FSU on Thursday night. Should be wrapping up on Friday. He does have another visit to Kansas planned. Now, he is 6'5", 260, so he's got pretty good size. Played 441 snaps there at Coastal Carolina. Had 18 pressures and 5 sacks. Only totaled 18 tackles on the year. So, this is a guy that I think maybe if you get the Sam Houston State, I think we are getting into some of those conversations like you mentioned earlier. If you get A, you let B go. I think if you get the Sam Houston State kid, you let this one go. But again, they're bringing him in. They're seeing they're seeing how he looks. They're getting a feel for him. And so again, you got to trust the defensive line. The new defensive line coach, Terrence Knight, and you got to trust his evaluations here. But obviously, like we talked about on the defensive line, man, you needed some help. You lost some of your biggest names, and you lost some of your backups, some of your depth players too. So you need, not only do you need guys who can come in and be starters for you, but you also need some depth pieces too. And so not everyone you're going to take is going to be a starter.
Right.
You were 2-10, so you're not going to get everyone that you get on campus.
Exactly.
But, again, if they want him, I think it's, you got to look at what he can do for you.
Yeah, you got to see what he can bring and what does he add to the room. Like if he's not adding anything to the room, there's no point in spending the NIL money on that player if he's just going to be another body. Now, yes, you need bodies because you got to have practice, you need depth. But right now, Florida State, you cannot waste money on practice and depth. You need to spend money on results and production. And so is this kid, does he outweigh what you currently have, or does he outweigh also what you're currently bringing in? As we talk about on the show often, your war. What is the war for this player? Does his wins above replacement warrant you to spend the kind of money to get him on? And so I do think at some point it's going to come down to, like, again, who's going to commit first, and then if both of them want to commit and Florida State has to decide, okay, well, we're only taking one of these commits, then who's the better player? I feel like they take both because, I mean, right now you just need to throw bodies at the problem. That's what you need to do. But you want to make sure those bodies are going to be productive, and you're not just taking bodies for depth or practice, but productive bodies. And so I think they'll take both. Now, obviously, going back to the Chris Murray thing, I mean, he just finished his visit, and he already said that he is taking his visit to Auburn and Virginia. So he's leaving campus, and he's going to go take 2 more visits. So you just hope that you made enough of impression that you can be able to hopefully get a commitment. If not, then this other kid here might be maybe Damonte might be the kid that you get. We'll see.
Right. And I think that's important because when you maybe aren't in the alpha dog position to just land whoever you want, and when you hear the name Auburn, you do get a little bit worried because they will surely back up the Brinks truck for whoever they want. You got to keep other options in the fire, right? Other irons in the fire in case things don't pan out. So the Auburn thing does worry me a little bit, but obviously if they know there's a need at the position, then you can't just bank on one guy. And when it doesn't work out, you're left, kind of getting caught with your pants down. You got to have backup plans upon backup plans. And so the one that I did want to mention here that did not make it in is defensive line transfer from Tennessee. Jason Jenkins did not make it on his visit. So it looks like that probably will not be happening. But looking at Florida State overall, man, I think so far they've done a pretty good job in the transfer portal. Obviously, you would like to see a couple more of these guys pop for Florida State. But, I was just looking at something, Michael, and, when you talk about Florida State in 2025 versus 2024, I think, we had talked a little bit before the show about like, what if you just didn't know 2024 happened and you just
Right.
looked for what 2025 could be
Yeah.
without the baggage of 2024? And so far, man, now they have not updated their rankings. I just checked since the Caleb commitment. But right now, per 247, Florida State has the 8th ranked transfer class, the number 1 transfer class in the ACC. The next best team on your schedule next year, as far as transfer rankings, now again, they could have good high school recruiting and stuff like that, but is Miami at 28th. And then you have a couple of teams like Alabama and them around the 30s, high 30s. Now, of course, this is all going to change because those teams will have more guys going in and coming out of the portal because they were still playing.
Right.
So I think this tells you two things, right? I think first off, as much as we hated for 2024 to happen to set this up, I think it was beneficial for you to kind of be all in on acquiring talent from the portal before most other teams, right? You were
That's
able
right.
to get these
Right.
guys in. You're able to be entirely devoted to getting their commitments, and it's paid off with a top 10 transfer class. Now, this will
Right.
probably again be updated. I think you'll move up to at least 6th or 7th in the national rankings with the commitment here. But I think getting on them early was good too. And then
Yeah.
also, man, like with one good transfer class, these other programs could obviously have a chance to move up.
That's right.
But you're hanging right there with a top 10 transfer class, man. If you just looked at this program next year and you go, okay, well, you got a quarterback who's rushed for 1,000 yards in the past. Let's say you get the running back who's put up 1,000 yards. You've got some new offensive linemen, man. I think so far with the pieces that you've brought in, added to what you had last year, because again, I don't think it gets talked about enough that as bad as last year was, there's so much of that could be pointed to inexperience at quarterback and a terrible offensive line. But that doesn't mean that there wasn't a core nucleus of talented young players and even talented veteran players like a Blake Nicholson. All these guys who maybe with a little better coaching and a little better system with some little better pieces around them, that season never happens. And so I think knowing that and looking at where this transfer class is, man, I don't see where this thing can't get turned around faster than people expect. And we're going to talk about this later in the show. But I think Arizona State has to be the thing that you got to point to. 3-9, 3-9, 11-3, and won the conference and made it to the, competitive in the playoffs.
Right.
So I think, man, again, like if you just hit on a couple guys, man, you could really see this thing where it could get turned around rather quick.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. And I do think if you're looking at the totality of what Florida State has to climb, to use a Mike Norvell reference to for this year from 2-10, if you look at what happened, like you said, I really think honestly, and I wouldn't even place a lot of it on the quarterback, because remember, DJ was brought in with the expectation that we were going to be able to run the ball. And I imagine that if we were able to run the ball, we would have got the Oregon State version of DJ. I still believe that to this day. But because we couldn't run the ball, we got the worst version of DJ, who didn't get injured. And then really, we never really got to see what a Brock Glenn or a Luke Cromahawk, rest in peace to Mississippi State, Luke Cromahawk now, what they could have really looked like behind a decent to effective offensive line, because it could have been a completely different. Now, you still have to address the wide receiver drop problem or not being able to get open or get separation. Yeah, it's a problem. And I think they've addressed it. I think they have addressed that in this portal class. But the biggest thing was the offensive line. So if you can rebuild the offensive line and have a moderate to decent offensive line that's going to give you the ability to run, and we know that no matter where Gus Malzahn has been, no matter if he's had a great quarterback or a terrible quarterback, that boy's been able to produce 1,000-yard rushers every single year or pretty close to it. We're going to be able to run the ball next year. And so if you can get, if Castellanos can be just decent, then I imagine that this gets turned around, at least at minimum, your floor is 7 wins at minimum.
Yeah. And I mean, 2024 did happen. So you can't just ignore it. Like it didn't happen. And they obviously have a big hole to dig out of. But, again, when you look at a lot of the drop problems, that was the veteran wide receivers.
That's right.
Those are the ones that kept screwing up. And so you kept both of the young tight ends. They didn't transfer out. You kept almost pretty much every one of the wide receivers, the young guys. They didn't transfer out. So I feel like you do have a lot of pieces that were already there to build around. They were just young last year. And so you kept playing a lot of the veteran guys. And then, when you went youth movement, I mean, what did you expect to happen with a bunch of freshmen? So
exactly.
That's to me where if you bring in a lot of these proven producers, which is exactly what they're doing, And you combine that with the young talent that we have to where they're not forced to play. They're not forced to be relied on. They can contribute and learn and develop. Man, I definitely feel like I can see a path to this thing getting turned around.
Yeah.
And so we'll just have to see how the rest of the portal shakes out, because I do think they need about 3 or 4 more pieces. You know, they haven't landed the Utah State running back yet. That would be a big one there. But yeah, man, they get about 4 or 5 more transfers that they hit on, and I'm going to start feeling pretty good about this team. Of course, we'll have to see how it plays out. Now, to get to some other news and notes from around the country, because again, like we said, there wasn't a ton to talk about today. So I just want to touch on a couple things that have developed over the last week or so that are relevant to Florida State, especially talking about next year. And the first up on that is Alabama quarterback Jalen Milroe did declare for the NFL draft. They also, on a side note, fired their co-DC today as well. You know, that's a mixed bag, Michael, because I think first off, you were a little bit worried with Jalen Milroe coming in because of what he could do with his legs, because he isn't a very experienced quarterback, was a 2-year starter there, could have been a 3rd year or maybe even 4th year starter there. I don't really follow Alabama that closely, but I think you probably wanted to face Milroe because when you look at the bowl game, you kind of see the ups and downs of Milroe, the turnover issues, the fact that he's not a great quarterback. But it is interesting because you will be facing a new quarterback. And I think because Alabama is going to probably have to go figure this out late, you're either going to roll with someone you got or you've already missed out on a lot of the good quarterbacks. So that is something interesting to see there looking at game 1 for FSU 2025 is they will be facing a new quarterback and at least a new co-DC at Alabama.
Yeah, and it'll be real interesting to see what they end up doing. I was trying to look up their depth chart to see who was coming behind him.
Well, I can tell you this. I just looking at PFF real fast.
Okay.
The Jalen Milroe threw 324 pass attempts, and the rest of the room threw about 35.
Wow.
So whoever it is, and Ty Simpson threw the most behind him.
Ty Simpson, that's his name.
With 25 attempts. The others have 6 and 3. So whoever it is, unless they go find someone out of the portal, is going to be inexperienced going into that game.
Yeah, and see, you know, Ty Simpson, that's probably the one I was thinking of more because that's who had come in to spare Jalen Milroe a couple of times. And so, yeah, I'm curious to see what direction they end up going. I really think it's too late. There's not any great quarterback in the portal right now. And so I think they're probably going to go with probably one of their current players on the roster, which in my mind is also a help for Florida State. I mean, yes, Jalen Milroe wasn't that great of a passer, but man, he was dynamic on the run. And Florida State's always had a problem with running quarterbacks. Case in point, why we went and got the one that almost killed us last year and killed us this year. So I really don't know. It's hard to really judge this opening game until you kind of see what they both do in the spring, like what they got. Like, do they look good? Do they not look good? And then, of course, you know, Alabama with their 9-3 season, you know, they all want to fire Kalen DeBoer right now.
Yeah.
I'm just not sure what Alabama team we're getting. Like, is this the fall finally of Alabama? Is this the decline that we've been waiting on for a gazillion years? Or will Kalen DeBoer retool and get this team back to being, you know, the Alabama of what we've known for most of our, you know, 30s of our life? And so I'm curious to see what that is moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, we'll see. You know, he did have a little bit of a mobile guy there at Washington with Penix, and it worked out well. But, you know, I just think that whoever they get, unless it's a late transfer or something like that, for even a guy that has warts with Milroe, right? There's something that's to say when you're coming in against a new defense under a new DC with a bunch of new pieces in game 1 against Florida State, for Florida State to be facing a quarterback who might be making his first start ever. Because even Ty Simpson, most of those snaps came against Mercer.
That's right.
I do see where Milroe, you know, he can have great games and he can have bad games. But overall, I think it's something to keep in mind that there will be a new starting quarterback for the Crimson Tide coming into that game. Also, I saw today that Clemson fired DC Wes Goodwin. I think this is a little bit interesting here because, you know, Clemson had an elite defense under Brent Venables. That's really what made Clemson who they are currently. when he moved on to take the Oklahoma job, Wes Goodwin stepped in as an internal promotion and was basically a disciple of Venable. So he basically copy and pasted the same scheme.
Right.
But that defense has kind of trended downward since he took over. And so now they make a change. I'm sure it's going to be an attractive position because that defense is still loaded with talent.
That's right.
But, you look at coming in, man, it's you never know, right? You never know if that person's going to be a hit or a miss. They brought in Streeter and things didn't work out. And then so they went out and they hired Garrett Riley. It still kind of hasn't really worked out great there with that yet. So, I mean, it could take them 1 or 2 tries to get it. Maybe they go give Adam Fuller. Who knows? So we'll see, man. But at the end of the day, like to me, any kind of change, like any break in continuity, especially for a program like Clemson that doesn't often have breaks in continuity. I think it's just something to kind of keep your eyes on throughout the offseason because obviously, we do play them at Death Valley next year.
Well, I just wonder, if Dabo is starting to see the writing on the wall, honestly. I mean, because he had a really for the longest time, that was the longest tenured coaching staff. They didn't, like you said, they didn't break up very often. And so now he's, obviously let go his offensive coordinator, let go his defense coordinator this year. And I'm curious to see if they can continue to recruit and to coach and develop at the same level. You obviously see there's a clear drop off. Last year was last year's season. They had a little bit of better season, but really, I mean, they weren't as great. And honestly, if Florida State had a competent offensive line, I still believe we could have won that game. I mean, just if you look at it, it just made no sense how terrible we were. I thought we could have been competitive if you go back and watch that game. And so you can see the clear drop off there, especially on the defensive side. They don't have the freak athletes like they used to have anymore. And so you're just wondering if the product of being Clemson and being in a secluded really area of South Carolina, not having the, 2 national championships they have under Dabo plus whatever the one they won in the 80s, not really having that like good solid recruiting base that we have here in Florida. I just wonder if it's starting to finally catch up with all the equalization of NIL and transfer portal and I think didn't they take their first transfer portal player this offseason, I think, if I heard correctly.
They have taken them in the past, but it was just like basically a depth at quarterback. This is I think they took their first non-quarterback transfer this year. So Dabo knows he's got to adapt. And I think that's part of it. Really, Clemson has been a little bit lucky, right? Like they kind of backed into a playoff spot and an ACC championship this year because, we were down. And so like even in a bad year, though, they've still been a 9-win team in contention for the ACC title. But I think that the thing with Clemson is like you have seen the trend and it's headed in the wrong direction. And so like you said, without that immediately drawable success to the recruits, which you were able to do, back before NIL, it was like, Dabo's his shtick was great and all that. People loved to play for him and family and all this stuff. And Clemson was an up and coming program and it was all great. But now it's kind of like kids aren't really sold by that as much anymore. And so you also have the lack of success there. And they've been successful still, but not like the Clemson that we've seen. And so you wonder, like you said, you started to make some changes on your coaching staff, trying to get the magic back. So you wonder now, how stable is that ground that they're standing on? Because as we know, as Florida State fans, it's a lot easier to get there than it is to stay there. And so they've been kind of fortunate to stay there by being the best team in a bad ACC for the last few years. But man, if you get teams like SMU and maybe even Miami and Florida State makes it back, they're going to have to step their game up a little bit.
Well, what Florida State was able to do during the Bowden era and what Alabama was able to do during the Nick Saban era, it's so rare. It's so hard to do. And it's almost unrepeatable. Like Alabama couldn't even get to the 14 years that Bowden was able to do in his era. And so now but what I was going to say is that what you see so much similarity between the downfall of the Bowden dynasty to the downfall of the Dabo dynasty. Like you see it clearly where Clemson is backing themselves into an ACC championship. Florida State towards the end of the Bowden era was backing themselves, when they beat Virginia Tech in the first ACC championship game. Like was Florida State really that good that year? No, but they caught some breaks and it happened and they were able to win a couple 10-win seasons towards the end of Bowden era. But then you saw more of these 7-5, 7-6, 9-4 seasons seasons where it was like, oh, okay. And then you saw the continuity of the staff. Mark Richt goes to leave towards Georgia. Chuck Amato, the chess, goes to NC State. All these big Brad, I can't think of his name. The other guy that was on the offense staff. Yeah, he leaves. And so you see all these different coaches that are leaving. The stability is not there. The wins are coming less. We're still recruiting in the top 10, but now we're missing on players. We're not evaluating as well as we used to. So it's not a really true top 10. It's a pseudo star recruiting top 10 classes. And then you start seeing that. And well, guess what? Now you're starting to see the same thing happen with Clemson. And so, yeah, we might be looking at the beginning of the end of the Dabble era.
Yeah. And now I will say that I don't think they're going to fall to like a lot of terrible seasons. Like they're going to be a perpetual 7 to 9 win team.
Yeah.
But again, like you can see the trajectory that they're headed. One last note here is Wake Forest head coach Dave Clawson did step away from the program. Most of you guys have probably heard that. I think that's another coach taken out by the structure of college football as it is.
Yep.
Just doesn't want to deal with it. So that's another team on your schedule that will be looking at having a new head coach. And as we know, half their offensive line transferred because we tried to sign most of them. So there's a couple other notes here that we'll get to throughout the course of the offseason as things change. Like, it's the little things, man. This is why college football is so hard to predict from one year to the next. This really had a lot to do with why we stopped doing a preseason magazine, because you just don't know what to expect. A couple other notes that I had here was like UVA starting quarterback who is on your schedule next year. He hit the transfer portal. Virginia Tech's best running back. He ran out of eligibility. He's gone. So we're not the only ones that are losing things. There's a lot of teams that are going to have to figure a lot of stuff out next year. So one of the last things that I want to touch on here is these bowl game reactions.
Yeah.
Looking at some of the bowl games that we just had wrap up, as well as the second round of the playoffs. And, I joked about it in the opening about the cyclone watch down in South Florida. But, Michael, it was funny that almost every single team besides Ole Miss, who arguably played a Duke team that was very undermanned without Malik Murphy and all that, they blew them out. It is what it is. But just about every team that argued they belonged in the playoffs really went out and proved to the committee that they belonged by losing their bowl game.
Correct.
Miami does lose to Iowa State 42-41. So I think they've still had one bowl win since 2007. That is literally it. Bobby Bowden, rest his soul,
has more bowl
wins than Miami since 2007. So that's insane. And then, of course, there's the whole Cam Ward situation. Played the first half, opted out of the second half. Some Miami fans are going to say that was planned, which, don't get me wrong, I understand it, because you kind of want to see what you got next year in Emory Williams. But to me, if you're Cam Ward and you're coming out there to break some kind of record, sounds very selfish to me. Like, either play or don't, right? Either don't play at all and you just didn't get the record. It is what it is. Or you play and you finish the game because when your team needed you the most, you kind of bowed out. And to me, it's just a little bit of a bad look, because they probably win that game if he plays the second half.
I absolutely 100% agree with you on this. I don't care if you decide not to play the game. I don't care.
It would have been understandable.
It'd have been understandable. You're going to be a high draft pick. Oh, you're assuming. Be funny if he wasn't, but you're going to be a high draft pick, right? And so you got your whole future worried about. You don't want to get injured, so don't play. I don't care if a player opts out. Do that, okay? Or play the whole game and go out there and compete with your team one last time for your brothers. And you're going to go out there. If he plays that whole game, they win, hands down, clearly, right?
Yep.
But to go and get the record, then to go in at halftime, and you and your coach agree. And I want to talk about Mario Cristobal for a second after that. You and your coach agree that you're going to sit out the second half so that you can see what you have in Emory Williams, okay? You come out and you do that, and you have a chance to win. But your backup cannot complete a pass to save his life, and you're just sitting there, you're standing there on the sideline watching this all happen. You end up losing. As a fan, if I'm a Miami fan, I am ticked off. I am ticked off, because 100%. For me, you decided to play the game. You decided to play, so you should finish the game.
Yeah.
But to not want to play the second half, and whether or not they agreed on this beforehand, the reason why I have a problem with this and what I want to say about Mario Cristobal is because if they agreed on this in the before the game, as a head coach, you should protect your player and in the post-game comments say, this was already agreed upon. Instead, what he actually said was, I keep those conversations to myself about whether or not he was going to play in the second half. You just basically threw your player under the bus with that comment. Basically, you're leading everyone to believe that you wanted him to play, but he didn't want to play. Now, so you can clear the air right now and say whether or not that was an agreed upon thing. Regardless of the fact, if you're going to play, you should have played the whole game. You cost your team the chance to win a bowl game. You don't care because you're about to go make millions.
Exactly.
But those Miami fans have to live with it now.
Yeah. And the reason I think it's funny and ironically funny is because of all that we heard last year about FSU's culture problems and all this stuff because of being said that, players sitting out because of the snub in a situation that was completely different than what they went through.
Correct.
And so now you have your starting quarterback, your star quarterback, your Heisman contender comes out here and opts out in the middle of the bowl game and leaves the team hanging out to dry. And so to me, that looks kind of like a quitter, kind of like a culture issue.
Yep.
So, take it for what you may. But I do think at the end of the day, I just want to touch on it because I do find it a little bit funny here that your best team in the last 2 decades that you spent a boatload of money to put together, no ACC championships, no ranked wins, no bowl wins, and no playoff appearance. So congratulations. You just basically achieved a whole lot of nothing.
10 wins. Enjoy it.
Exactly. You won a state championship. Congratulations. You're now a high school football team. I know we're going to hear about that because we do the state championship too, but it's just
exactly.
So the other one too is Bama lost to Michigan. That was interesting because boy, those Bama fans were coming out of the woodwork. And if you follow us on social media, I posted a little bit of a joke about them trying to figure out if they were in the playoffs. And man, they all come in here. And I heard when we passed you for that 10-win streak, and we're certainly going to extend that this year. Just the most arrogant, spoiled fan base. And half of them probably didn't have that script A on the back of their car until Nick Saban came to town.
Exactly.
And so it was funny to see another team that, hey, we belong in the playoffs because big bad SEC turns around and loses to a Michigan team that was 7-5 or something like that. Yep. So not exactly a great look there. So again, I will just say this too. Look, Bama's a good team. I don't know the opt-out situations there. I did see the Ryan Williams kid was playing who was a little frustrated with Milrose, some of his passes and stuff like that. But I will at least say this, man. I know we were just dumpster juice last year.
Yep.
I mean, here's the crazy thing, right? Florida State is going to come into that Alabama game on a 1-game losing streak. Alabama's coming into that game on a 2-game losing streak.
Mm-hmm.
That's a little bit crazy. So it ain't
crazy.
It ain't Nick Saban's Alabama. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah. Well, and the thing is, to me, the thing is this: Alabama, you should have never ever been in the college football playoff to begin with. I mean, you lost to a 6-6 Oklahoma team. You lost to a Vanderbilt team, and that loss to Oklahoma, you got boat raced.
Yeah.
And so you weren't very good at the beginning of it. So you shouldn't have been in anyways. And then to go out knowing that everyone's going to be watching you to see what you do against Michigan, you crap the bed. I mean, you can't even score. You can't even move the ball. Now, don't get me wrong. You played decent defense against an absolute atrocious offense. I mean, Michigan's had a terrible offense all season long. I'm curious to see what this Alabama team is going to look like. Let's be real. They're still stacked in talent. Coming into next season. They got talent for days. So they don't have a talent problem. It's a cohesion problem. Can he actually get the best out of them? He was great at Washington. He was great at North Dakota State or South Dakota State, wherever it was. But he won 9 games. I mean, you can't fault him for that. We only won 2. So but I'd be really curious to see if he can get the cohesion of winning at Alabama or Jesse, is this another Brian Kelly situation, right? Good coach, but just can't get LSU really going.
Yeah. And, he's got to be absolutely sick watching Notre Dame just win playoff game after playoff game after playoff game.
And he can't get in.
Right. I think you're right, man. I definitely think that just looking at it, there's no shortage of talent at Alabama. Right. So that game's still going to be imminently hard next year. But again, like I said, man, they've lost their last 2 games of the season. So it is not necessarily the Bama that we know of old. Let's just put it that way. We still might lose by 40, but who knows?
That's right.
So speaking of playoffs and getting into the playoffs, as we saw second round of the playoffs play out. And so Georgia lost to Notre Dame 23-10. Obviously, we know that coming into that game with a backup quarterback, that was going to be a tough ask anyway against a really good Notre Dame defense. But you know what? Hey, congratulations, Georgia. At least you got the opportunity to go in there with your backup and lose that game. But man,
Right.
I'm telling you, like right now, I got to say, when you look at some of these games, UGA, I know they lost to Notre Dame, but, a lot of people thought UGA
Yep.
was still going to win that game. Ohio State dominates Oregon 41-21. I don't think anybody really saw that one coming there as well because of the way the regular season game played out. Penn State beat Boise State 31-14. Genty wasn't even that great in that game, which, of course, always brings back the G5 to P4 argument. I think
Right.
everyone pretty much saw that one happening the way it was.
Yeah. Yep.
And then, of course, Texas survives Arizona State 39-31 in double overtime. Man, it seems like it's going to be a Notre Dame-Ohio State matchup in the national championship, and that's going to be a heck of a game because both of these teams look like they are peaking at the absolute right time. I mean, just dominated Oregon, and then Ohio State again. That's their second dominant performance in a row, and then Notre Dame. Their offense is going to be their limiting factor. They didn't score 27 against Indiana, 23 against Georgia.
Yeah,
but man, that defense is no joke. So that's my pick for the national championship, and we haven't even played the other two games yet. I think it's going to be Ohio State and Notre Dame. And I think it's going to be great. But there was some. Yeah. At least I'll say this. At least we finally got our first good playoff game in Arizona State and Texas. And oddly enough, it was one of the ones that we thought was not going to be a good playoff game. But, man, I just want to take one more second to give Kenny Dillingham an absolute shout-out for what he's doing there at Arizona State. I mean, you could argue that I know it wasn't in the COVID year, but you could argue that the program that he took over was in worse shape than Florida State was. I mean, you're talking about sanctions and bowl bans and all this type of stuff from the disastrous tenure of Herm Edwards there. But, man, I mean, then you come in after back-to-back 3-9 seasons and you go 11-3, you're Big 12 champs, and you were probably the most competitive team in the playoffs so far. So, man, it just really goes to show you there with them. That's why I keep saying, like I said earlier, that this thing can get flipped around, man. You need a good, strong culture.
Yep.
You need a quarterback that can move, which is what they have. And then, if you can find just Cam Scatteraboo, which could be this kid from Utah State, you never know. Man, like it just takes a couple of game changers and a cohesive unit working together, and you never know what you can accomplish. Because, man, I know they want to win. Losing sucks, as Dillingham said, but man, I don't think they have any reason to hang their head after that game.
No. Listen, hats off to Kenny. I mean, gosh, what a great season. What a great turnaround of a program that was absolutely terrible. And for you to be in the college football playoff in year 3, for you to be a Big 12 champion, for you to actually have the one decent game so far in the college football playoff, because all the other games were blowout. I mean, the Notre Dame Georgia game was basically mostly a blowout, except for that last score they got. It wasn't that close. And so for you to have a game, now granted, the game started as a blowout, but for you to make that, but for your team to make that incredible fourth quarter comeback, and one of the things I love about Kenny is Kenny literally got on the post-game presser and literally said, hey, the players played the hardest. This loss is actually on me. And he talked about it, because you and I talked about in the pre-show about that 4th and 13 call in overtime where they basically had Texas beat, and they call a cover 0 blitz. And the safety let the safety let the receiver Golden, Texas, number 2, get behind him and to catch that touchdown pass. Well, Kenny Dillingham came out afterwards on Twitter and basically said, that call is on me. I wanted that call. I called the cover 0 blitz, which is supposed to come into a cover 4, which means you have 4 defenders in the backfield that allow that, and you're not supposed to let anybody get behind them. He said the player, that safety, played it exactly the way we wanted to. It just so happened he was faster and made a bigger play. I get that. Again, I can make other arguments on the other side of that, but for a coach to take that pressure off that player, I mean, that's why you want to play for a guy like Kenny Dillingham. Love Kenny Dillingham. He's going to, and I believe ASU, this is not a one-time thing. I don't think this is a one-trick pony. I think they're going to be consistently in around that conversation of a playoff berth for the Big 12. So kudos to him. In that sense as well too. And then when you talk about the Final Four with Texas, Ohio State, Penn State, Notre Dame, listen, I actually think this is going to be a Big 10 national championship game. I think it's going to be Ohio State versus Penn State. I just do not see. Penn State has a really good defense too. Notre Dame has a really good defense, but I think the difference is going to be Notre Dame's offense is just one-dimensional right now.
Yeah.
And I just don't think you're going to beat Penn State with a one-dimensional offense. I think it's going to be Ohio State versus Penn State for the national championship, which will be, I mean, just like the Big Ten will be like living in heaven.
I know. And how ironic is it, too, that the only SEC team left in the playoffs was a Big 12 team last year.
Was a Big 12 team.
And I'm sorry, changing the patch on the uniform one year doesn't necessarily automatically make you like that SEC level program. But no, I agree, man. Kenny Dillingham is actually, he's a guy you want to play for. And I just saw this morning that he signed a 5-year extension that could potentially be turn into a 10-year contract with a one of the best paid coaches in the Big 12. He's just a guy you want to play for, man. It's just a culture guy. I miss having that energy around the program and whatnot. But that was it for round 2 of the playoffs. We'll see how these semifinals now go. It's hard to keep up with. There's so many.
It's now the
semi playoff games. But yeah, man, I think hopefully we see some good ones now that we've got down to these last games. Because I will say that Texas-Arizona State game was really fun to watch there. So that's going to do it for today. Kind of just our general thoughts on where Florida State's at in the portal. Some of the other guys that, obviously we just got the commitment. Some of the other guys that are hopefully on the way, as well as some overall thoughts from around the college football world that are relevant to Florida State, and then our thoughts on the playoffs. So hope you guys enjoyed this one. Make sure to check back with us as more news breaks. We'll be here to record with you guys. Obviously, we're getting into that slow part of the offseason. So we got baseball season coming up that I'm excited to talk about as well. I think we're around 40 days now. Really, man, I got to start digging into this baseball team. But after what you saw them do last year under Link Jarrett's leadership, I think we are going to have probably one of the best bullpens, one of the best pitching rotations in the country. When, you look at getting Cam Leiter back and you got Jamie Arnold and you got a bunch of arms that they've added for depth. You lost some power out of the lineup, but you got some hitters in there as well that maybe, a little more consistent there. So, man, I'm really excited about this baseball season coming up. Obviously, we know basketball is a different subject. We're not going to touch on that today. We'll wait and see how some things flesh out about that. But yeah, man, that's all I got for today. Excited about baseball season. Excited about this transfer class that we got so far coming up, man, and just really excited to see some more names jump into the boat. Hopefully, like you said, hopefully we get some commitments coming up here because there's some guys, man. Again, with that running back out of Utah State. Man, that would be a huge get for us. So any final thoughts before we get out of here and we'll wrap this one up?
Yeah, I'm just along with you, man. I'm excited for the baseball season. I need to dig in and kind of see who they got and what they're looking at this year. I might even try to take my boy up to a couple games this year because he's playing baseball. So I'd love to take him and just to see that from a college level, like the high competitiveness of that. So I'm gonna try to get up to Tallahassee and get a couple games in with my son. That's a couple of my goals this year as well too. I'm also excited. I do like the additions from the portal that the football team has been making. Again, I've said it since the end of the season, and I'll keep saying it. I will not make a judgment on this team until I see them take the field against Alabama and see what they do, because we got burned last year, and we're not going to make that mistake again this year. And so I'd love to see them make the improvement, but I like the direction that they're heading with the portal. I'd like to get them to get the running back. I'd like to get them a couple more defensive linemen. I'd love for them to get the linebacker and the Marquise guy. And then, honestly, Jesse, again, I'd love for them to reopen the offensive line thing. I like what we got. I just want more so that we can find the best 5. Yeah. And maybe they feel like with these additions, these 4 additions, plus what they already have on the roster, they feel like they have a competent group. I just like them to get maybe 1 or 2 more just for safekeeping. But other than that, I'm excited.
Yeah, I think it's like an NCAA football. If you could turn injuries off, maybe you feel good about where you're at. But the fact is they happen. And so
that's right.
I would like to get more guys. But again, I think if maybe you get a couple of the guys that you feel good about, like the Utah State running back and the Sam Houston State defensive end, and then you add really about 5 or 6 more transfers, man, I feel pretty good about where we're sitting going into 2025. Of course, we'll see how it all plays out. But that's going to do it for today, guys. Make sure you check out today's sponsor, Alumni Hall FSU. Get some new gear for the new year with 10% off using code SPEAR. Drop a like and subscribe. Man, we are creeping up on 2,000, and it would be great if you guys could make that happen in 2025. So appreciate that. Rate and review on the podcast helps spread the message as well. So we appreciate you guys tuning in, and we will catch you on the next one. Thanks for watching, and as always, go Noles.